All right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at a fascinating and honestly, a deeply unsettling phenomenon. You know that feeling, right? It's the end of the school year, the weather finally warms up, exams are done, and there's just this massive collective sigh of relief. It's a time of total celebration and freedom. But structurally, what's actually happening here is a sudden breakdown of those rigid daily routines we've been relying on. And when our routines break down, well, our situational awareness usually breaks down right along with it. So, we're going to examine three distinct real-world case studies derived from recent accounts, and these brilliantly illustrate the totally unexpected vulnerabilities that pop up when the highly structured school year comes to a screeching halt. And that brings us to the core question of our explainer today. What happens when the safety of the school year ends and the real nightmares begin? You see, the whole early summer mindset is all about letting your guard down. You feel safe because the stress of the year is finally over, but as we'll unpack today, that relaxed, totally carefree mindset, that is exactly what opens the door to unpredictable dangers. All right, so let's start with case one, the underground tunnel. This first case perfectly frames the danger of arrogance. Specifically the danger of exploring forbidden, abandoned spaces just to prove a point to your friends. Now, what's really interesting about this location is its history. We're looking at an old, very traditional private school. But before it was a school, it was actually a hospital for the sick, specifically treating tuberculosis. Local legends claimed that back in the 1950s, when the school was being built, construction workers unearthed a massive amount of skeletal remains. And because tuberculosis was highly contagious, the story went that the hospital staff had used these underground tunnels to safely transport and dispose of the bodies. Now, whether that's entirely factual or just kind of exaggerated over time, this dark history cast a really long psychological shadow over the students. And that eerie atmosphere? Well, that was exactly what a student named Steve tried to exploit. Just before the school year ended, Steve broke into the school to pull a prank. He completely trashed some classrooms, but more importantly, he stole some red paint from the art room and wrote these massive, horror movie-style threats across the lockers. We're talking phrases like, "Death is coming." When Steve was caught and expelled, he left screaming. He actually claimed that while he was in the building, he heard evil, unnatural whispers coming from the dark basement. Now, our narrator and his friends, a group of self-proclaimed nerds who utterly despised Steve, well, they decided they were going to use the very last day of school to break into the basement themselves, purely to prove that Steve was a liar. I mean, breaking into a dark, legendary basement just out of spite? Yeah, terrible idea. Because one of the boys' mothers was a school janitor, they easily slipped through the back door on a cold, early summer night. They descended into the basement armed with literally nothing but cheap dollar store flashlights, and the basement was massive. It was filled with old storage and, super unsettlingly, dozens of these old religious statues. But as they explored the freezing corners of the sprawling space, they found something that just stopped them dead in their tracks. Moved behind some boxes was a hole in the wall. It was small, maybe about the size of a beach ball, but just large enough to crawl through, leading directly into a pitch-black tunnel. These were the very tunnels from the local legends. Our narrator ended up losing a game of rock, paper, scissors, and, well, he was forced to crawl inside. As he crawled forward in the dark, he began to hear a sound. It was this whooshing noise that slowly turned into a whisper. He shone his weak flashlight ahead, and about 15 feet away, a figure was squatting in the dirt. You guys, it wasn't a ghost. It was a person. The man was completely emaciated, his ribs visibly pressing right up against his skin, and he was staring back with these terrifying, vacant, half-opened eyes. The narrator froze, absolutely terrified, and asked if the man was okay. In response, this feral man made a totally unnatural, guttural noise, and then he violently lunged forward. He literally stayed in that bizarre squatting position as he did it. The narrator scrambled backward in absolute terror, making it out just in time as the man crawled out of the hole right behind him, actually trying to grab his leg before the boys sprinted up the stairs and escaped into the night. And this brilliantly illustrates something I find absolutely fascinating. It's a psychological concept known as the uncanny valley. It's that deeply unsettling feeling we get when something looks human, but its movements or features are just wrong enough to trigger our primal alarm bells. You see, the boys were expecting ghosts, right? An abstract, almost fun urban legend. What they actually encountered was a very real, highly unpredictable human threat living in a forgotten space. It is a stark reminder that abandoned places aren't empty. They're actually often occupied by the desperate or the dangerous.
Okay, moving on to case 2, the masked party.
So this scenario shifts from an abandoned building to a super crowded environment, and it really shows us how a carefree, celebratory mindset can completely compromise our situational awareness. The setup here is your classic end-of-year celebration. College kids return to their hometowns and throw a massive, impromptu Halloween-themed costume party in late May. It's hosted at a friend's remote mansion while his parents are out of town. Because it's a costume party and word spread fast, the house quickly fills up with this huge, unvetted, unrecognizable crowd. And crucially, I want you to notice the massive backyard here. It has absolutely no fence, and it bleeds directly into a pitch-black, densely wooded forest. Amidst the chaotic party, our narrator, Kip, spots a girl wearing a bright gold masquerade mask inside the house. Later on, while swimming in the pool, he sees that same girl wandering out into the dark tree line all alone. She turns, waves, and gestures for him to follow her. Now Kip, wearing literally only his swimsuit and, bizarrely enough, a plastic hockey mask, runs over to the edge of the worlds. He can't see her in the dark, and shivering from the cold, he says he's just gonna go back inside. But then, from the darkness, a soft voice calls out, "Don't go back yet. Come and find me first." So Kip actually follows the voice deeper into the freezing woods. He finds her mask lying on the ground. And then he finally spots her standing in the dark, her head tilted down, with her dark hair completely obscuring her face. Now, the absolutely crucial point here is the extreme disconnect between Kip's assumption and the terrifying reality. He assumes he's engaging in a harmless, fun, flirtatious game with a local partygoer, so he introduces himself. And she replies, "I know who you are." And she lifts her head. Guys, it is a girl he briefly dated at his college, a girl who lived 8 hours and 2 states away, a girl he specifically broke up with because she was showing some highly unstable, really controlling behavior. Before Kip can even begin to process the absolute impossibility of her standing in this forest, 8 hours away from her home, he hears a branch snap to his left. His ex-girlfriend lunges out of the darkness, holding a solid metal baseball bat. She takes a vicious, full overhead swing directly at his head. Kip dives to the dirt, just narrowly avoiding the strike. She screams and swings again, missing a second time. Operating entirely on pure adrenaline at this point, Kip scrambles to his feet. He sprints blindly back to the safety of the packed mansion, shouting for help. She had driven all day and methodically stalked him right into the woods for an ambush. Now, this case is a textbook example of normalcy bias, and honestly, this matters for all of us. This is our psychological tendency to underestimate danger just because we assume things will proceed normally. Think about how easily anyone could fall victim to this while just out having a good time. Kip ignored some massive red flags here. A silent, masked stranger luring him away from a safe group into a pitch-black, freezing forest. He ignored it because his brain was strictly in party mode. He assumed the context of a fun summer party completely protected him, which totally blinded him to a lethal, very targeted threat. Let's look at our final story today. Case 3, the uninvited student. Here, we see how a breakdown in professional boundaries at the very end of the school year follows someone directly into their ultimate safe space. Our subject is Miss Jones. She's a substitute teacher covering a senior history class, and it's the final half day of the school year. After the students leave, she heads down to the principal's office, gets some great news about a potential full-time job, and then walks back to her empty classroom just to grab her forgotten purse. But the classroom isn't empty. Standing completely still next to her desk is a quiet, brilliant student we're going to call Ben. When she asks him what he's doing, he just shrugs and flatly replies, "Doing some thinking." As she asks him to leave, he pauses at the door, doesn't even look back, and mutters, "Thank you, I'm sure I'll see you around." When Miss Jones finally goes to grab her purse, she realizes it's been moved. It went from inside her closed desk drawer to sitting out on the chair. Her money is still there, but the purse was definitely searched. Now let's trace how this builds, because the escalation here is so methodical and just terrifying. A few nights later, the school year is officially over, and the teacher and her husband are hanging out in their backyard. At around midnight, her husband finds their backyard shed door wide open with muddy footprints inside. Then, the very next morning, Miss Jones wakes up to find their actual back door slightly ajar. At first, they just write it off as absent-mindedness, But that night, unable to sleep, Miss Jones gets out of bed. She walks out into the dark hallway and freezes. There is a dark, shadowy figure standing at the very end of the hall. She slowly reaches out for the light switch, and when the hallway illuminates, standing right there, inside her home, is her student Ben. He's standing directly outside her 7-year-old son's bedroom door. He just smiles at her and says, softly, "Hey, Miss Jones, nice house." And then he turns and casually walks right into her young son's bedroom, shutting the door behind him. Absolute chaos erupts. Miss Jones screams for her husband and dials 911. Her husband sprints over and kicks open the son's bedroom door. Thankfully, their son was actually staying at a cousin's house that weekend. Ben, now cornered, scrambles out the second-story window, leaps down to the ground, and disappears into the night. But guys, the aftermath is incredibly frustrating. The police visit Ben's home, but his parents swear up and down that he's been asleep in his bed for hours, providing a rock-solid alibi. With no signs of forced entry because he likely unlocked that back door earlier, and a parental alibi, the police are completely powerless to act. Ben had gone through her purse on that last day of school solely to find her ID and memorize her home address. And what makes this case so deeply chilling to me is a razor-thin margin of time. Just 10 seconds. Miss Jones later realized that if she had stayed in bed trying to sleep for just 10 seconds longer, she never would have caught Ben in that hallway. He would have been inside her son's bedroom, completely undetected, while they slept just down the hall. It is a terrifyingly razor-thin margin between safety and absolute tragedy. So, what do we actually take away from these source materials? Listen, these aren't just scary campfire stories. They are highly practical lessons in situational awareness for when our daily structures disappear. First off, respect the unknown. Abandoned spaces are not playgrounds. They are wildly unpredictable environments. Second, do not underestimate unstable individuals. And seriously, never let a celebratory mindset override clear red flags. And third, always trust your intuition. An open shed, a moved purse, a door slightly ajar. Do not brush off those minor anomalies around your home. They are so often the precursors to a major threat. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this final thought to reflect on. Look, we all love the freedom that comes when our heavy routines finally lift, but freedom so often brings a dangerous lack of focus. So ask yourself, when your routine changes and your guard finally drops, who or what is waiting in your blind spot? Stay aware, stay safe, and thank you so much for joining me to unpack these fascinating cases today.